In today's Torah Talk, as I advertised, we wanted to do something a little bit different and talk about the questions that arise. I gave one little talk about a week ago about the issue of stress during the pandemic. And now what I do is I'd like to talk about the issue of stress. The topic for today's issue is stress, couples, relationships, and I invited a relative of mine, Melorra Sochet from New York City, who is a psychotherapist and has written a few blogs about these issues very lately, and she deals with them more or less on a daily basis. In her latest blog, she talked about relationships and the need for space. And without further ado, first I want to introduce you, Melorra. Please say hello, and so we'll be able to see you when you talk. We'll be able to see you on the screen.
Hi.
Hi.
Good, and hello, everyone. I'm so thrilled to be here.
One second. Okay, keep talking because I don't hear you at the moment.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Great. Glad to be with you today. As Rafi said, I am a psychotherapist. I'm based in New York City. And about half of my practice is with couples. And couples face stressors and ups and downs in the relationship during the best of times and during normal times. And since the arrival of COVID-19, couples have been under an inordinate amount of stress. And what that has meant is they're faced with these new responsibilities, such as helping their kids with school online, being more careful going to the grocery store, working from home, being much more careful under when commuting to and from work. And when we are under a new and an unexpected and unprecedented level of stress with no conceivable end of sight, our nervous systems go out of whack and we react more quickly to one another. We tend to do this where we feel most safe, and that often is with our partners. So what is happening is when we are at home, we may be seeing that a normal interaction with our partner will escalate much more quickly. And when a situation escalates more quickly, the chances are that we both feel injured by one another, misunderstood, and alone. So the first thing I want to leave you with is a sense that this is all normal. I don't want you to think that if your relationship is hitting more bumps these days, that there's anything fundamentally wrong with your relationship. This is what happens in relationships when we are under stress. And one of the things that we need to learn to understand are what leads us to stress and what is our stress, how do we show up when we are under stress, and how can we begin to shift our stress response so it doesn't come out all over our partner and wind up leaving us feeling terrible and alone, and our partner feeling injured and unfairly attacked. So some of the ways that we can do that is beginning to understand what are our triggers. We tend in our relationships to have the same argument again and again in different ways. So if we think about it, it feels like, oh, we're arguing again, and now we're arguing about this, and now we're arguing about that. But arguments tend to fall into 1, 2, or 3 categories. And if you look into your relationship, you'll see, for example, one couple I worked with the relationship was always about one person feeling that the other expressed themselves too loudly and was always yelling, and the other partner feeling that they were being unfairly made to feel inadequate, and not living up to their partner's expectations, no matter what they ever did. So if you look back on your arguments with your partner, you'll probably see some patterns. So the first step is to figure out, what do those patterns look like? And often in arguments, one person is what I would call the pursuer, the one who steps out and wants to fix the problem right away. And the other is the withdrawer, the person who pulls back, the person who wants to go up to their room and hope that the argument can just go away. So to discover what the patterns look like in your relationship, you can then move on to figuring out, what is my perception? When my partner yells at me, what am I hearing? How is it affecting my sense of self? And am I feeling inadequate? Am I feeling like I can never do anything right? And rather than withdraw up to my room, could I possibly do something else? Could I try pushing myself to come out in a way that would allow me to show up with my partner rather than withdraw? Because when I withdraw, what happens is my partner pushes forward more. And when she pushes forward more, I withdraw more. So what we see is that we get into this infinity loop, this very negative infinity loop of a cycle that makes both of us feel terrible. The more she pushes, the more I pull away. The more I pull away, the more she pushes. So what can each of us do in our relationships that would be a different response to our partner? If I'm someone who withdraws, how can I come forward with my feelings and express them more respectfully and genuinely? How can I help my partner see what I'm really feeling? How can I tell my partner that when you push, I feel inadequate, or I feel like I'm never getting anything right, or I feel like I'm an outsider in this family? And how can you begin, if you are the pursuer, to say, you know, I'm screaming so much because I care about the relationship so much. I care about you. I want to make things better. It's not that I want to be this screaming person that you find this angry shrew. I want to be someone who shows up and is heard in a real and authentic way. And when we come to our partners from those places of vulnerability, as opposed to what I would call our reactive stances, the withdrawer has their reactive stance, the pursuer has their reactive stance, and I can go over those at a different session if we have time. But how can I show up from the place of vulnerability, the place that drives those reactive stances? How can I come forward to my partner and say, wow, when I'm getting really angry, what I really want to say to you is this relationship matters to me so much and I'm feeling alone. Or when I go up to my room and I hide, it's because I'm at the end of my rope and I don't know how to make you happy. And from there, we can begin to have a more productive exchange from a place of vulnerability. And during times of stress, we tend to move away from vulnerability much more into our reactive stance. Does anyone have any questions or ideas?
I just want to start out by saying, are there statistics yet at this point about difficulties that have had during the pandemic?
There are not official statistics, but if you look around the world, there are statistics showing that in countries that have already gone through, the Asian countries, there are statistics showing that there's a much higher level of divorce rate right now. So couples are really suffering at home.
I would also think that at the beginning of the pandemic, the idea of having a shared goal of trying to keep the family safe, of trying to create supplies, that would have actually brought people together at the beginning. But I guess after a while, there's an erosion because of the stress.
Right. I think that's absolutely true. I think people were in the beginning of the pandemic feeling like we are in this battle together. We have to do everything to save ourselves. And we're going to have this unified force. But what you also saw in the beginning of the pandemic, Rafi, is that people had different ideas about what it meant to be safe. So different levels of risk tolerance. So couples would argue over whether it was still okay to see friends, whether you needed to wear masks to the grocery store. And the person who tended to be the most cautious would launch into terrible arguments with their partner about how unsafe their partner was making them feel. So it became not about the pandemic, but their partner is someone who was causing their fear and making the family unsafe. So yes, you could see families unifying, but you also saw it as a huge point of conflict over how much safety was needed and what practices needed to be followed.
Okay, I have more questions, but if there's somebody else who wants to interject, that's okay. If not, okay. My next question is, if at the beginning of the pandemic, the shared goal created a way to overcome, is there a way to recreate that shared goal in order to overcome the vicissitudes of getting through the pandemic at the same time? Or is it too artificial to do that?
Well, I think what you mean, yes, I think the shared goal of caring for our families, caring for our children is really a critical and a value that hopefully the couple has had since they met and partnered and decided to marry and have children. I think what needs to happen, though, is that people have different expressions or different ideas about how to meet their shared goal. And so couples need to sit down and recognize we have this overarching shared goal, and we may have different ideas about how to reach that goal. How can we negotiate them so that we both feel heard, that we both feel safe, and we both feel understood? So those conversations need to be happening much more regularly. And when couples get into trouble, it's when those conversations are not happening regularly, when they're not sitting down and saying, hey, when you went to the grocery store the other day and brought our 3-year-old and our 5-year-old, that really made me uncomfortable. And can we have a plan for how we're going to handle shopping in the future? That's one example, one simple example. So that what it needs to happen is much more continuous conversations with partners about how they're going to go about meeting their shared goal. First, declaring the shared goal, and then lots of conversations about how to execute it.
So if you would give like 3 tips to somebody, whether we're talking about a couple or even just flatmates, or maybe a parent and a child who are living together, and they realize that they're on the verge of, okay, it's gonna all hell is gonna break loose in a moment because I can't take it anymore. If you had to give them 3 tips of how to avoid that or try to diffuse the bomb before it happens, what would be those 3 tips?
First tip is get to know what is the bomb for your partner. Get to know what are the triggers for your partner that make your partner feel unsafe. Both of you need to understand that. Same with children. Figure out what it is that makes them feel unsafe. And it's not a one size fit all. You'll be surprised. People have very idiosyncratic issues that make them feel unsafe. The next is then act on those, act on what you learn. And the third would be go out of your way more than usual to show affection and love to your partner. Your partner can be a place of deep safety and attachment. It can calm our nervous system. When we have a good relationship, it actually serves to calm our nervous system. So all of us, given the stressors that we're under, need to get an extra hug, need to get the I love you in the morning, need to get the I'm with you all day. If you're feeling upset, know that I'm with you, know that I hold you in my heart. Couples need to feel that from one another much more affirmative statements of care and concern.
So that would be number 4, let's say. Okay. And is it the same with a child?
So children are, it varies so much on what your child is experiencing. For children, I think it's important to have a balance between talking about what's going on, but not frightening them. They really only need to know, and this is of course dependent on age, but for the, let's say the 7 and under crowd, or even the 10 and under crowd, they really only need to know as much as is necessary to keep them safe. So sharing anything more about the death rates, the idea that we don't know how long this is going to go on, that it's never going to end, they don't need to know that information. And they need to find, just like adults need connection, they need connection too. So if there is a family that you're working on if they have brothers and sisters they can play with, terrific. But if not, they need to have opportunities for play, because play is also a perfect antidote for stress. So finding other children that you can make a compact with. We're not going to go out. You're not going to go out. We're going to be a little pod. Our 2 families are going to be a little pod, and you 2 can play with each other because we know that you're safe. We've made this compact with one another. That's a great way to help kids have a friendship circle that can feel safe.
What you were mentioning before, I think applies not only to children about getting too much information, also applies to adults. Because people have more time, I found this from many people, that they're watching everything about the pandemic on YouTube. And then, of course, they're watching all the political stress around. And then they're watching, of course, security issues in the world. And I think it's just a little bit too much for a human being to deal with all at one time. One thing that I say
to all of my patients, not that they follow it, is that there should be no news after 3 p.m. because 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. Because if we continue to have those horrifying stories circulating in our heads, it's going to affect our ability to digest our dinner. It's going to affect how we show up with our families. It's going to affect how we sleep and get the rest that we need to go on in the next day. This is a marathon we're in. We could be engaged in this for several years in different forms. So we have to prepare for this the way we prepare for a marathon. And one of the key ways of reducing stress and helping our spirits and our bodies, because this stress affects our bodies, you see much more headaches and exhaustion and anxious energy, is to reduce our news intake after a certain hour of the day.
I think here in Israel, where a lot of things have already opened up, there is like an attempt by the government to start talking about living with the virus in whatever form it's going to continue, and trying to deal with it long term if necessary.
Mhm.
I think most people don't want to hear that, but of course, here in Israel, we're used to dealing with stress situations, mostly having to do with security and maybe a little bit of politics too. But this, in a sense, is new for everybody, even in this part of the world. But also the idea, I think, what you mentioned before, of trying to keeping the stress to its limitation and learning how to live with it.
Right.
I think, yeah.
Re-entry is a whole different type of stress, right? We've kind of prepared and adjusted to being in lockdown, and then once it's time to re-enter, that brings up a whole different level of stressors that we have to consider. And one thing to think about is, how can we do it gradually and in our comfort zone? How can we, it makes us feel very out of control to go on right back into the world, a place where lots of unknowns are facing us. So if you're going back to work, maybe go back to work only one day a week and see how it goes. And then gradually step into more days. Recognize that you are going to feel stressed, and that's okay. Know that it's normal to feel stressed resuming activities that don't feel totally okay yet, and that you're not prepared for. When you're facing something new for the first time, you want to give yourself as much control over the things you can control. So figure out what your routine is going to be. Figure out what mask you feel the most comfortable with, and there are a wide variety of masks out there. Figure out if you want to wear gloves. Figure out where you're going to take your gloves off when you get off your commute. Have a very clear plan that allows you to be in control over those pieces of your life that you can be in control of. You can't control who's on your bus ride with you, but you can control how you dress on your bus ride. So those are some ways to try to manage the stress. Also, I would highly recommend that you begin to think about engaging in some mindfulness work, some meditation that allows you to ground yourself and calm yourself in stressful situations. And the times to practice that are not when you're in the stressful situation, it's when you're in the safety of your home. So if you practice that in advance and get it internalized into your way of being, when you find yourself in a stressful situation, you can draw on it, and you can work to calm yourself in the middle of that crowded bus.
Just north of you, of course, in Montreal, today, June the 15th, they're opening up the stores for the first time. I don't know what's happening in Toronto, but I assume it'll be soon also. And but a lot of people I know from here too, you have this sort of fear of going back to the regular, not knowing if the situation has actually changed or if the government just wants everything open up because they're more afraid of the economics than they are of the pandemic. And I think with the issues of stress and how to deal with it, I mean, I've always, and others too have said, try to look at the long range more than the short term, meaning which way maybe life after the pandemic in order to calm yourself down. Do you have any maybe suggestions or techniques for a person who wants to try to de-stress in the comfort of their home, whether during the lockdown or even after the lockdown? Because I'm wondering if there might be stress even after that could linger on.
Right. Well, in addition to meditation, and there's some apps that are readily available that I think are excellent. One is called Calm and one is called Headspace. Rafi, what you mentioned, fantasy. I mean, if you read some books that were written about the Holocaust, those people that tended to have the most resilience and survive during outrageously unbearable situations were those who could imagine a life beyond, who could picture themselves in places far, far away that felt safe to them. So one thing to think about is conjuring up for you what is, and give it a lot of detail. What is your safe space? Is it in a field? Is it, Rafi, I just got a note that says someone can't hear me.
Okay.
I don't know if that's been the whole time.
No, I've been hearing you the whole time.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what is your safe space? Is it in a field? Is it on the top of a mountain? Is it in a synagogue? What is the place that you feel your deepest comfort? And really make it vivid and work to internalize it inside of you so that you can draw that up. Then I'd also want you to create, who are your protective figures? Is it someone from your life that you know? Is it a fictionalized person? Is it a rabbi? I want you to give them lots of detail, lots of power, and then I want you to try to internalize this inside of you. And finally, who are your comforting figures? Is it a parent? Is it a childhood caretaker? Is it an uncle or an aunt? Is it someone fictionalized? You can always use, superheroes. Who are the people that comfort you and make you feel really cared for? And I want you to picture that person, and I want you to internalize that person. And so when you are at home, I want you to spend time with your safe space, your protective figure, and your nurturing figure. And know that you can draw on them at any time, either collectively or individually, to help ground you and to feel better in a world that feels very tumultuous and uncertain. Now, what I'm describing to you quickly, usually I do over several sessions with patients, but it is something that you can try to do on your own. The other thing that is very much an antidote to uncertainty is finding people who you feel prop you up, who make you feel good about yourself, and spend as much time with them as possible. And if you can't see them in person, schedule Zoom sessions with them, schedule FaceTime sessions with them. Connect with the people, even if you haven't spoken. This is a time people are reaching out to people from their past. Even if you haven't spoken to them in years, say, you know what? I really want to talk to you right now. I need your voice in particular. People are responsive to that. People feel touched by that. So reach out to those people that make you feel best about the world and best about yourself, and resume those contacts.
Okay, thank you, first of all, very much. But before we go, I see there's one question. I'll take just one question. I think Yonatan wanted to ask a question.
Something that I want to ask you aside, I used to sail for a long time in the past. And we used to say that if you want to test a couple, you put them on a boat for a month, and then you know if the couple is going to work or not. And in a way, the bidud is very similar to that right now. But one thing which used to work is just having rules about, put your house in order, everything at the same place, cleanliness, appearance, and this kind of thing, and discuss that before, so that that helps a little bit. That's something you relate to, or discipline, in other words.
Rafi, can you repeat?
He was saying that he used to say that if you want to see if a couple gets along, if they're on a boat for 2-3 weeks and they can survive on that boat, it's a big test. But he said when it does happen, you have to create, certain limitations and I guess behavior rules on the boat also in order to survive the test.
Yes, actually, and I can talk about this another time if it makes sense, but my latest article for Psychology Today, I talk about, it's called I Love You, but Can You Please Go Away? And it talks about how we need boundaries in the context of our relationship so that both people can feel respected and rejuvenated and keep their desire for one another alive. And I think the gentleman who just spoke was touching on that during this time that we're on our boats, metaphorically speaking, together with our partners out at sea, we need to continue to have time apart. We need to continue to respect one another's, we should dress for one another. We should maintain our hygiene, because this is the long haul. We're going to be on these boats for the long haul. And we can also get creative about spending time apart. We can consider taking shifts with the children. We can consider taking shifts with the children so that we're not on top of each other all the time. We can consider changing our bedroom setups so that we don't necessarily sleep together every other night. Sometimes religious Jews do that anyway. It's a way of really making sure that we have some distance in the context of togetherness, so that the vitality of the relationship and the passion in the relationship can remain alive.
Thank you very, very much. Melorra, this was really wonderful, and thank you for sharing your knowledge and your insights and your wisdom with us. And we hope you'll agree to come back again. And in the meantime, I'll find out from people what type of questions they want to ask if we have another meeting.
That would be wonderful. Send in lots of questions is a good way to go.
Okay, so thank you very much. And I'm sure I speak in the name of everybody here, both on the Zoom and on the Facebook, and the people who will be looking at it in the future. So I'll say shalom from Jerusalem.
Shalom.
Bye.
Shalom.